Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm so pleased you are here listening, and I do hope you've had a fab week. I am back from my month in Bali, which was absolutely fabulous. And I'm still reflecting on the fact that I've had a month away. Never done that before. I think the longest holiday that I've had was probably 3 weeks, but the longest time away's probably only been sort of 2.5 weeks. And the 3 weeks was when I got married. And then, 2 weeks, I think, has been the longest vacation that we've had. So it was amazing. And I think I was a little bit nervous to think that, but would we be bored after 2 weeks? But I have to say, I've come back feeling so rejuvenated and relaxed and raring to go. And I was in my office the first day yesterday, and it was just really great because I've got so many exciting things that are coming up. I was actually prepping for something big that's happening in September that I'm going to be part of, and really excited about that, and I will share that in the coming weeks. And I've also got some other exciting things coming up. I have a program that's starting in September, and I have some other things that are coming up. So if you are looking to stop drinking, or if you are already on the alcohol-free journey and are looking to really up level, then I have some exciting things in store for you in the coming weeks and months. And I can't wait to meet you and for you to be part of it because it's really great. They're just some exciting wonderful things that I know will be beneficial for you and will help you along the way. So that's that. And I have been doing, if you've been following along and you're new to this alcohol-free journey, you may have started on the alcohol-free August challenge, which I am doing on Instagram, and also you can get it on TikTok and YouTube as well. So every day I've been going live with a tip alcohol-free August. We are on day 15 today. So if you've been following along, you're 2 weeks alcohol-free, and that's amazing. How wonderful, how incredible that you have done 2 weeks without alcohol. I'd love to hear how you're feeling. I'd love to hear if you've got any questions. I'm hoping that the tips are helping you each day. And so I thought I'd recap. Last week I did the recap on week one. So this week I thought I'd recap week two if you're following along. And if you're not, it's never too late to join in and to start. Why not start today? Because as they say, the best time to plant a tree was probably 10 years ago, but the next best time is today. So why not start today on your alcohol-free journey? If you know, or you've been getting these nudges, or you think that being alcohol-free could be helpful in some way, well, today's the day. Take a break, see what happens. And I promise you, you won't regret it. And we've still got over 2 weeks before the end of August. So by the end of August, you will already be 2 weeks alcohol free. So that would be amazing. And then by the time we get to things like Sober October and Dry January, you'll be a dab hand at it. So why not start today? And to encourage you, I'll just go through the last 7 days in terms of what we covered. So, day 8, we talked about journaling and the importance of journaling and reflecting on where you are and your feelings and how you're getting on alcohol free. Then we talked about connection and how important it is to be connected in this space and to find like-minded people who are on this journey, maybe a bit further ahead of you, maybe stopping the same time as you. But it can be really challenging if you have taken a break from alcohol, but you're the only person in your family or in your friendship group who isn't drinking. So the alcohol-free movement is absolutely growing, and there are so many people who would want to help you. I am rooting for you. I'm here for you. Let me know if you've got any questions. Happy to connect. But there are so many people out there and so many groups, and I'd love you to be part of the Thrive Alcohol Free community. So feel free to grab one of the free resources, and then you'll get the weekly emails from me, and you'll hear about all the exciting things that are coming up in Thrive Alcohol Free. Then we moved on to day 10 with cravings, managing cravings. And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't want to stop drinking because they know that the cravings come. They have the wine witch that comes along at wine o'clock and says, go on, you can have a drink. And those thoughts that come up during the day, when you say to yourself you're going to moderate, you're not going to drink, but then you still find that you're craving alcohol. So physical cravings actually disappear within a few days. So what you have after that are thoughts, and it's your thoughts that are the cravings. And so it's really about changing your thoughts and pausing before you reach for that drink and thinking, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or fearful? And if I am, what can I do instead? And so I have an EFT, which is tapping, which helps release those negative emotions and build in positive feelings and emotions. And I have an EFT tapping video, which you can get for free on managing cravings. And so if you would like that, I'll put that in the show notes. Then day 11 is all about playing it forward. So when you're tempted, as it's Thursday night, Thursday used to be Thirsty Thursday. For me, I remember it would be the day you go out after work with your colleagues and have a drink or two or three to wind down after working hard. This is the play hard bit. And Thursday might be a trigger for you. So if it is, and obviously the weekend, Friday, Saturday nights, etc., barbecues, whatever you happen to have going on, maybe you're on vacation and you're struggling a little bit and you're thinking, well, actually, it's all inclusive. I can just go and get a drink. Play it forwards, which was the tip for day 11. It's all about thinking about the next day and how you will feel and playing it forward and thinking about what would you feel like if you had a drink? What does that mean? What impact does that have on you? Versus what does it feel like if you didn't? And then maybe also have an activity planned in the morning. So you have some sort of accountability and something to look forward to the next day. And then day 12 was podcasts. And so you are listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. But for me, in the early days when I stopped drinking, I devoured podcast episodes, and I'd probably listen to at least one episode a night. And it was a way of realizing that some of my beliefs weren't actually true around alcohol. And hearing people's stories and people's journeys was just fascinating to me. And so this is episode 48. So there are lots to go back to if you haven't listened to every episode. If you have, then I'm grateful, and I would love you to leave a review if you have been enjoying the episodes. But podcasts are a great way, alcohol-free podcasts. But of course, I always talk about how being alcohol-free is all about personal growth and transformation. And so the other types of podcasts are those personal development podcasts, the personal growth podcasts. There's so many out there. So if you're on your alcohol-free journey and you're 6 months down the line, a year down the line, a year and a half, 2 years down the line, and you want to do something different or learn something different, find a podcast that is doing something that you want to do, that you're interested in. It's a great way to learn, great way to hear stories, and a great way to grow. So day 13 was all about gratitude and being grateful and what you're grateful for. And I'm so grateful for this summer and for just feeling rejuvenated and reinvigorated again. And I think that's just so helpful. But what are you grateful for today? What is it that you are grateful for? Write it down. I encourage my clients to write 3 to 5 things each day that they're grateful for and really savor it, really think about it. Don't just write it down really quickly. And it doesn't need to be anything big, but think about what's the reason that you're grateful for it and say, I'm so happy and grateful that this has happened. And then if you also want something to happen in the future, that you're looking forward to, you're hoping that's going to happen, or you're working towards, then write in the present tense, I'm so grateful that this has happened, and describe it and feel it. And that's another way of helping that thing come to be. And then finally, day 14 is herbal tea, which I just love herbal teas. I remember in the early days, before I discovered alcohol-free drinks, I was drinking water, coffee, and herbal tea. And at the time, I think it wasn't that exciting, but I have grown to absolutely love herbal teas. They are my time to sit, sip, reflect, and think, and just enjoy and savor the flavor of herbal teas. And there's so many different ones now. So if you haven't tried herbal teas, I'd absolutely recommend it. And I always have a sleep tea before bed, and that really helps me unwind and relax and get ready to sleep. So I hope the week 2 tips are helpful for you, maybe inspire you to start your journey or at least to continue. And they're good tips for you if you have been alcohol free for a while. So I'd love to hear how you're getting on the Alcohol Free August Challenge. I'd love to hear which of the tips you found most helpful. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. You can DM me at Thrive Alcohol Free. And yeah, I hope this challenge is something that is useful for you and it's inspiring you on your way. Okay, so today's guest is Sarah Rusbatch, and I'm delighted that Sarah is on the podcast. I actually reached out to Sarah back in October 2021, would you believe? So it's coming up to 3 years ago, and I had just qualified as a transformational coach. I was obviously also on my alcohol-free journey, and I saw what she was doing, and I just loved everything she was doing. So it was wonderful to connect with Sarah. We didn't quite connect. We connected via email, but didn't quite connect to chat to in 2021. So it's great that she's now on the podcast and we had a great conversation. The reason we didn't talk at the time was because she's based in Perth and I'm in the UK and we just couldn't get the timings to work. And so I actually recorded this in Bali, where the time difference was none. We were on the same time zone, and it was just really great to talk and to hear what she's doing. So, Sarah is the author of the best-selling book Beyond Booze: How to Create a Life You Love Alcohol Free. She is a multi-award winning health and wellbeing coach. She's an accredited grey area drinking coach, a menopause coach, and a keynote speaker, sharing her journey to sobriety and the impact of alcohol on mental health to global audiences. Sarah works tirelessly to support women all over the world to create and live their best lives as they age. And so, without further ado, here is the conversation with Sarah. So, welcome, Sarah. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome, and it's so lovely to meet you. So I've been trying to get in touch with you for a while, so it's lovely that you to get you on the podcast, and great to have you here. For those people that might not know you, why don't we start with who are you and what brings you to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast?
So I am Sarah Rusbatch. I am a mum of a 12 and 14-year-old. I live in Perth, Western Australia, but I'm from the UK. So home for me is Manchester in the north of England, but I'd been living in London for 10 years before I moved out to Australia. I have been alcohol free. I've just passed my 5 year soberversary. So I'm 5 years
Congratulations.
and 4 months now. So yeah, the time is flying. And I now work as a grey area drinking coach, which means I work with people, mostly women, mostly midlife women, they don't identify as being physically dependent on alcohol. They don't identify as needing to have rehab or medical support to withdraw from alcohol, but they have identified that they are drinking at a level that is having some kind of negative consequence, and attempts to change or reduce their drinking have been unsuccessful. So I really step into that grey area drinking of people that are not physically dependent, but they're not a take it or leave it drinker, someone that just has a drink every now and then. They're in that middle, that grey area. And turns out that there are a lot of people in that grey area. I was a classic grey area drinker myself. And that's probably why my business has been so successful and I've been able to support thousands and thousands of women now, is because I get it, because I've been there. And I think I'm probably very relatable because my story is one that resonates with women all over the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it is really interesting. How do you define grey area, a grey area drinker? Because it's pretty much everyone, isn't it? If we're looking at it, there's no real, it's a spectrum, of course, but I'd love to hear your definition specifically. I
Yeah.
know you mentioned that it's obviously people that are drinking more than they would like to, but they're not medically dependent. But when you think of the spectrum, I tend to say it's, if you're not teetotal or you don't need medical intervention, haven't hit sort of that point, then actually you're potentially a grey area drinker. But what is that? Is that how you view it as well?
Look, I've got friends who they're not teetotal, but they wouldn't sit in the grey area. So they would be someone that,
Mm.
like my friend Nat, you go out with Nat and you say to her, "Do you want a drink?" And she's like, do I want a drink? What do I feel like? Do I want a cider? Nah, I'm just gonna have a Coke. Like she is just
Yeah.
completely take it or leave it with her drinking. She could
Wow.
go 3 months
Yeah.
and not have a drink, and then she might go
Yeah.
out and have two ciders and she'll be pissed because she hardly ever drinks, and that's enough for her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
alcohol has no place in her life. It has no place in her brain. She doesn't
Yeah.
use it for anything. She doesn't need it to socialize. She doesn't depend on it to manage her stress. It is just a, yeah, do I fancy a drink? So I think it's
Yeah.
helpful to think about a scale of 1 to 10. And
Yeah.
one being someone who doesn't drink or maybe has a glass of champagne at a wedding once a year, and 10
Mm.
being someone with physical dependency on alcohol who needs medical support to safely withdraw from alcohol, because we have to remember that alcohol is one of only 3 substances that the human body can die when going through withdrawal. So that's a
Mm.
1 and a 10. I would describe my friend Nat as about a 2. And I
Mm.
describe grey area drinking as about a 4 to an 8 on that scale. So we've got to
Okay.
the point where we're using alcohol for something. So it's
Mm.
kind of like, maybe it's, oh, I get home at the end of the day, I've had a really stressful day, work's been a nightmare, the kids are driving me bonkers, my husband and
Mm.
I have had a massive argument, I need a drink. You know, when
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
those thoughts and that desire. So that
Yeah.
might be a 4 of someone who just has a drink every now and then to manage their stress, but an 8 might be
Mm.
someone who is drinking really regularly. They, like,
Yeah.
so for example, I've got a client who drove herself. She was really, really worried about how much she was drinking. She went to a rehab facility and asked if she could check in to get some support to stop drinking. And they asked her how much she was drinking, and she told them, and they said, "Oh, you don't meet the criteria for us to work with you." So she was
Mm.
drinking a bottle of wine a night. So a bottle of wine a
Mm.
night would be like, some bottles of wine would be 8 units, 9 units of alcohol,
Mm.
and a
Mm.
bottle of wine a night. So that could potentially be 60 to 70 units of alcohol per week. The
Mm.
recommended units in Australia for women is 10. So she's
Mm.
drinking 7 times the amount of the recommended units of alcohol, and yet she's
Mm.
still not drinking enough for a medical
Mm.
facility to deem that be where they can step in and help. So I
Mm.
would put her as a 7 to an 8 on that scale, because a bottle of
Yeah.
wine, she's still high functioning. We consider someone at a 10 to be someone who is no longer high functioning in society. Perhaps they've lost their
Yeah.
job. they're waking in the morning with trembling hands and they need to have a drink. This client
Yeah.
was not drinking in the morning. She didn't drink
Yeah.
every single day. She would generally have one alcohol-free day a week. And because she could do
Mm.
that, she wasn't meeting that criteria for physical dependence. So that
Mm.
just gives you a bit of a snapshot of where that grey area drinking, about a 4 to an 8 on that scale.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Okay, brilliant. And so why did we go back? Why did you tell us you've been alcohol free for over 5 years? Congratulations, that's fantastic. But why don't you tell us a bit about your story and what led you to becoming alcohol free? What made you make that decision?
So I grew up in the north of England and started drinking at 14. So that was pretty standard where I lived. We went down the local park, we drank, we sometimes threw up and went home, went to bed and did it again the next weekend. And it was never a question of if I would drink, it was a question of when I would drink. Like
Mm.
alcohol was in my house a lot growing up. It was what I saw my parents do to socialize. And so much information is coming out now about the subconscious beliefs that we create about alcohol at a very, very young age. And me as a little
Mm.
girl, what I saw was mum and dad had these dinner parties all the time, and there would be people pissed in my house all the time. And it was never problematic. It always just looked like fun. It always just looked like there was all this
Mm.
laughter and singing that was coming from the dining room. And so little
Mm.
Sarah at that age thought, that's what adults do to have
Mm.
fun when they grow up. That's what I will do as a grown up. I will drink alcohol and have dinner parties with my friends, and that's how I will have fun. And it's interesting how we create, we're not even aware that we're doing it because we're so young,
Mm.
but from a very
Mm.
young age, many of us are creating that belief. So I went through all my teens and my 20s drinking. I had a high capacity for alcohol. So I was not someone who drank and then was in bed for 2 or 3 days, like dying on this or on the sofa or anything. I was
Mm.
someone that had a high capacity to drink a lot and bounce back pretty quickly, as we do in our teens and 20s, and was
Mhm.
straight back into it the next day, drinking a lot. And it's
Mm.
interesting because if you've heard the Huberman podcast, which he's done on alcohol, he says
Mm.
you can put a group of teenagers in a room and you can tell quite quickly who are the ones that get really impacted by alcohol and who are the ones that don't,
Mm.
because certain
Mm.
people will get really lit up by alcohol when they drink. Certain people, it's just our
Mm.
brain chemistry means we get a really big dopamine hit when we drink alcohol. And this dopamine hit makes us feel great, it makes us feel alive, it
Mm.
makes us feel like all of these things. Whereas
Mm.
you take my friend Nat, she probably would have had a drink, and after like 1 or 2 drinks, she's like, "Oh, I'm tired. I want to go home now." She didn't get
Mm.
that dopamine hit from alcohol, whereas I bloody did. And I was the one that was
Mm.
like, "What do you mean you're going home? I'm just getting started." And I never
Mm.
wanted the party to end. And then this also
Mm.
coincided when I left uni, I moved to London. And this was the era of the Spice Girls. This was the era of girl power, Sex in the City.
Mm.
Women can have it all. We can match the boys pint for pint down the pub. We can drink our
Mm.
cocktails. We don't need to rely on men. So it was a real moment in time of a movement. And alcohol was almost like this symbol of female independence, a little bit of a fuck
Mm.
you to the patriarchy. We're women, we can drink our
Yeah.
booze, we can do what we want. And there was a lot of role models in the media at the time, female role models that
Yeah.
we were all looking up to, and they were out there drinking and smoking and partying, and they didn't need to have
Mm.
men paying for their drinks because they were earning their own money, they were going out with their
Mm.
girlfriends, and this was being emanated across the world. And
Yeah.
none of us paused to go, "Oh, is this a problem?" Like that, like, is this a problem that women are drinking at such significant levels now? Because that was probably the first generation where
Mm.
alcohol was really, really something that was taking off for women. And
Mm.
interestingly, we now know that this was around the time that the alcohol industry had identified they were not making enough money from women, and they'd had a big discussion around how can we start making more sales to females. So they did two things. They created drinks that women would find more palatable. So enter the Alco Pops. So all of those
Mm.
alcoholic drinks that tasted sweet, that didn't necessarily taste like alcohol, so that the younger
Mm.
teenage girls would start drinking them. And then they
Mm.
also started specific marketing campaigns aimed at women because prior to this point, when I was a little girl, alcohol was not being advertised to women. It was advertised to men. It was something men
Mm.
did when they were watching sport. It was something men did when they were in the pub. Like alcohol was
Yeah.
a man's world. And then all of a
Mm.
sudden, the marketing had changed, the introduction of all these drinks that were aimed at young women. Saw a real movement of women starting to drink more. And that was something
Mm.
that I was very much a part of. And
Mm.
was it problematic? Like at the time, no. But what we now know, and we'll come on to this later, is it is
Mm.
problematic because women cannot metabolize alcohol in the same way as men. So
Mm.
encouraging women to drink at the same levels as men is problematic. And we'll talk about that later. So I sailed through my 20s, Sarah the party girl, Sarah the big drinker, never even
Mm.
crossed my mind that it was a problem. And then after I had my first baby, we decided to move from London to Australia. And this was like a real shit show for me for a lot of different things colliding at once.
Mm.
So I think the first thing was I was a mum now, and
Mm.
I had had a very successful career in London that had involved a lot of travel. It had involved wining and dining. It had given me a lot of
Mm.
financial freedom. I was meeting my
Mm.
friends after work in brilliant Michelin-starred restaurants. I had this independence, and it was a job that I loved, and I got a lot of self-worth from. And all of a sudden, I wasn't working, and I loved being a mum, but it's a massive transition, particularly when you've been in a very, very successful high flying career that was very commission based, it was very sales based, and I was very successful.
Mm.
So you're constantly getting that reward of when I do a good job, I get the accolades, I get the praise, I get this sense of self-worth. And that
Mm.
I was very driven by that. So all of a sudden I'm at home pureeing carrot, going to monkey music, changing nappies, and I'm on the other side of the world where I've got no
Yeah.
friends, I've got no
Mm.
family support. My husband, bless him, is amazing, but emotional support would not be his strength. I was then pregnant again very quickly. And so soon I had two under two. And
Mm.
I was so lonely. I was so
Mm.
homesick. I was so confused because on paper, I had everything that I thought I wanted. I had two beautiful, healthy kids. I had
Mm.
my dream life living in Australia, somewhere I'd always wanted to live. The sun was shining.
Mm.
We were at the beach every day. I didn't have to work because we'd saved enough money that I could take time off to be with the kids.
Mm.
And yeah, inside, I was so sad. I was so lost. I was so lonely. And that was when
Mm.
alcohol became something that I looked forward to break the cycle of those monotonous, lonely days. It's hard moving to the other side of the world, trying to make friends,
Yeah.
trying to get people to like you, trying to suss out who are the people at this monkey music class that might be my people. And old
Mm.
party girl Sarah, her only trick in the book to make friends had been to go out and get pissed with people. And so
Mm.
I'm trying to get all these women to come out and get pissed because that was the only way I knew how to form friendships. And they're like, well, I'm breastfeeding. I don't want to go out and get drunk. Who is this crazy English girl that's trying to get everyone to go to the pub all the time? But I didn't have anything else in my toolkit because that had been my way of making friends since I was like 14 years old. So there was a lot going on for me then, and I was just turning to alcohol more and more on my own at home. So certainly not something I was doing during the day, certainly not something I was doing on my own in charge of the kids, but
Mm.
certainly was something that I was looking forward to for the shift in consciousness that it was providing me. So it allowed me to not have to feel my feelings anymore because the feelings I was feeling were really sad and really uncomfortable. And I didn't have
Mm.
anything in my toolkit to help me process
Mm.
those emotions because no one had ever taught me how to process emotions because not many of us had ever taught that, are we? But what I
Yeah.
discovered was, alcohol makes those feelings go away. So
Mm.
if I just keep drinking, I don't have to feel. And
Yeah.
that worked really well for a short time. So for a short time, I was drinking one or two large glasses a night. So let's say half a bottle to three quarters of a bottle. Most nights, I generally took Monday and Tuesday off. That was my rule. I said to myself, I don't have a problem if I don't drink on Mondays and Tuesdays. But the thing with alcohol is number one, it's addictive. Number two, we build tolerance. So what starts as one glass then becomes two, then becomes three. I could easily have a bottle of wine, easily, and get up the next day and go to the gym and still be functioning. But what changed was when I got into my 40s, a few things started to happen. So number one, what I now know that I didn't know then is that women really struggle with metabolizing alcohol the older they get. So we can't bounce back like we do in our 20s. Alcohol was really impacting my sleep. So every time I was drinking, I was waking up at that 2 or 3 in the morning, hot sweats, anxiety, racing heart, couldn't get back to sleep. I was having really bad anxiety. So I remember going to my GP and saying, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm a shell of myself. I'm overthinking. I'm so anxious. And at no point did she ask me, how much are you drinking? But happily gave me a script for anti-anxiety meds. And then I had a couple of incidents where I just had gone too far with my drinking. I'd fallen over, I'd hurt myself, and I decided it's time to take a break. Okay, I'm going to do 21 days off because they say it takes 21 days to break a habit. So I'll do that. This was in 2017. And I did my 21 days, and someone had recommended the Annie Grace book, This Naked Mind. So I read that because back then there wasn't the podcast, the books, the quick lit, the sober communities that there is now. I was pretty much on my own with Annie Grace's book. And I read this book and I was like, oh my God, we have all been brainwashed into thinking that alcohol is this amazing thing. And then I read this book and it really, really changed my thinking around alcohol. So I did my 21 days and then I was like, I'm going to keep going. I feel really good. My anxiety pretty much disappeared after a week. I was sleeping really well. I was losing weight. My skin looked amazing. I just felt so much more positive and so much happier. I got to 100 days and I was like, yeah, right. But I'd never intended it to be forever. And so then I was like, well, I can't never drink again because that would just be really weird because I'm Sarah the party girl. So now I've done 100 days. I clearly don't have a problem because I wouldn't have been able to just do 100 days if I had a problem. So now I've broken the cycle, I've reset, and now I'm going to be a normal drinker. And that honestly was what I believed. I thought now I'll just be a grown up and I'll just be something more like one of those people that just has a glass of wine every now and then with their dinner. And that's who I am now. And within 2 weeks, I was back to drinking the same amount as before. And it was so shocking to me because I just wasn't prepared for that. Because, like I said, there wasn't the literature and the information about why moderation is so hard and why it doesn't work. And so to me, I was like, oh my God, like this is weird. But anyway, I'm back to drinking and it took its hold on me again. And so what followed was 2 years of from 2017 to 2019. I think I took 5 breaks from alcohol during that time of varying lengths. So I did 2 stints of 100 days and then I did a few sober months. But I always went back to drinking because I was always determined to think that I would be able to moderate. I know that by now there was more talk in the sober world. I'd read Alcohol Explained. There was the Sober Diaries. There was The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. There was all these books out there, and all of them were starting to say the same message that for many people, moderation is not possible. But I thought I was different. And I thought that I would be able to moderate. And I kept trying and I kept trying. And I would take breaks and I'd go back to drinking. This time I'll be able to moderate. This time I'll be a normal drinker. And then finally in 2019, I realized, nah, I know now. I've tried so bloody hard for 2 years. And I know in my bones now that moderation is never going to be an option for me. So I've actually got two options available to me. I carry on drinking the way that I have, which makes me feel anxious, exhausted, overwhelmed, sad, lethargic, just not showing up as the mum, the wife, the woman, the friend that I want to be. Or I can remove alcohol because I know that everything in my life is better when I remove alcohol. And so that was what I did. So April 2019, I had my last drink.
Wow, amazing. And yeah, it's so interesting because you said so much there, but the moderation piece is really key, isn't it? Because a lot of people do the same thing. I remember trying to do dry Januaries and Lents and things like that, and it just never really worked. And moderating is a challenge for people. So for someone who might be listening and going through that loop at the moment in terms of I can be different, I'm different, moderation could work. What would you say to that person?
I think it's really important that we understand the way that our brain works because this really helped me to go, if you are a 6 out of 10 with your drinking, when you've passed the point of being a take it or leave it drinker, whenever you have created a neural pathway in your brain that says, when I'm stressed, I drink alcohol and that makes the stress go away. When I'm sad, I drink alcohol and that makes the sadness go away. Whenever you have created a neural pathway where we're using alcohol as a short-term solution for avoiding something, that neural pathway is always going to be there. So if we're a 6 out of 10 with our drinking, we could take a month off, 3 months off, or a year off. When we go back to drinking, we're going to go straight back to being a 6 out of 10. And it might not happen immediately. So the way it got me lulled into this false security was the first time I had a drink. I went out with my husband and my best friend for dinner, and I had my one glass of wine, and I was like, oh, look at me go. I have smashed this. I am just now a person that just has one glass. And then, like I said, within 2 weeks, it was back because as soon as we opened the door a little bit, it finds every possible reason to fly open. And it's just really helpful to understand when we have gone from being that take it or leave it drinker, and we have got to the point where alcohol is serving us in some way to avoid a feeling or to reduce stress or whatever it might be, it's going to be really, really hard to ever succeed with moderation.
Yeah, it's so true. I couldn't agree more. It's a challenge, but I think there's still that messaging, and people have written books on how moderation works. And so it's good that you're raising that and being really clear on that. And I'm sure that's something that a lot of people who work with you resonate with.
And I
So
think
yeah,
as well,
that's
we have to get really clear as well on there's two types of moderation. So there's moderation where you have one drink and that's all you want. You just don't
mm,
want anything else to drink. So my friend Nat, who we
yeah,
talked about at the start of this podcast, she can
yeah,
go out and have one bottle of cider and it lasts her about an hour and she just doesn't
mm,
want any more. Like that to her, she moderates because she doesn't want more. The other type of
mm,
moderation is I want the bottle, but I'm going to use
mm,
sheer freaking willpower and
mm,
punishment and pain and energy to just have one glass. And it's all
yeah,
consuming. And in my head, I'm thinking of
yeah,
all the strategies, and I'm only going to have one. And I know I want to have two. Could I have two? Well, if I have two, is that going to be a problem? I could still drive if I have two. And we've got all of this
yeah,
chatter and all of this mental energy. And the people who I see who have passed the point of being a take it or leave it drinker, they're never going to be someone that just wants one. Like, I never
no,
wanted one. I loved getting
mm,
pissed. I loved the sense of like hedonism that it gave me. I loved the
mm,
big dopamine hit that it gave me. I loved the fact that temporarily I forgot my responsibilities and my troubles and my stress and all of those things.
mm,
So for me, one glass, it was just like, that's pure punishment. It's just having one and having to stop
yeah,
at one. And what I realized was, I'm just never going to be someone that just wants one. And moderation is
yeah.
actually harder than it is to have none.
Yeah, agreed. And so I'd love to carry on with your story then. So you said April 2019, that was it. So what did you do differently to 2017, where you obviously took that 21-day break and then lasted 100 days because you went back after 100 days there, but now you haven't. So what did you do differently?
So a couple of things. I think there's three major things that I did differently. The first is I stopped in the April and I booked in a half marathon for the October. So I had a really
Mm,
good goal that meant that I was out running. I was getting natural dopamine hits all the time, because when we exercise, particularly outside in the sunshine, we really flood our brain with endorphins, with dopamine. And I always say, if we're going to take alcohol out, we have to add something in. And for me, that first 6 months, it was running, and that really helped. The second thing was I went into therapy. So I did loads of work on myself, like very intense therapy to really understand. I do a certain style of therapy called schema therapy. And schema therapy looks at times in our life where we've created coping strategies that perhaps don't serve us so much anymore in adulthood, but they worked really well in childhood. And I unpacked a lot of that to understand my drivers, to understand where I'd struggled at different points in my life. And I didn't have any big T trauma, but I had a lot of what we call little T trauma. So, big T trauma describes big events that happen at some point in our life that are very, very traumatic as a one-off incident, such as, the death of a very close family member, abuse, living in a war zone, a serious car accident, things like that. Little T trauma is most often described as these smaller events that can actually be way more significant impact on us because they don't get the support that a big event would get. So little T trauma could be school ground bullying. It could be your emotional needs not being met when you're growing up. It could be being in a family where there was loads and loads of kids and you didn't get lots and lots of attention. It could be that you moved house a lot and moved school and had to settle in and really struggled with that. So by the time I was 14, I'd been to 5 different schools and we'd moved around quite a lot. And there's absolutely zero part of me that puts blame on my parents, because they were doing the best they could with what they had. But they were both parents of the war generation. Their parents had gone through the war. So you've got parents where they were raised like, you've got a roof over your head, you've got food on the table. What do you mean you're sad because Jenny won't play with you in the playground? Get on with it. And I think this is the story for a lot of women of my age, is that emotional sadness or emotional needs were not always met. And so you stuff a lot of stuff down inside you, and it doesn't get the exposure or the support that it needs at the time. So I did a lot of deep therapy around this with my therapist, which was incredible. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing was my husband also stopped drinking. And I think that that made a big difference for me. So while he hadn't stopped the first in those 2 years prior, when I'd been taking all my breaks, and it hadn't affected me that he was drinking, it wasn't like him drinking around me was something that I struggled with, and it certainly wasn't something that I was putting pressure on him to stop drinking. It definitely did become, it was almost a bit like a competition. I was kind of like, well, if he's not drinking, I definitely can't have a drink. It was like, who's going to crack first? And there was
Yeah.
definitely a little bit of that healthy competition that probably really, we're both quite stubborn. We're both quite competitive. And in the early days, I think that really helped both of us as well.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And that's so unusual. Normally it's one person stopping in a partnership than the two at the same time. So how wonderful was that? And what inspired your husband to stop other than to compete with you?
Well, I think this is the really interesting thing as well, is like lots of people say to me, it's the biggest struggle that they have is that their partner still
Mm,
drinks. And I've written a whole chapter on this in my book because it's something that comes up a lot. And I know,
mm,
because those first 2 years when I was doing these 100-day stints and taking all
yeah.
these breaks, he was still drinking. And
Mm,
it's so interesting for me because he always said to me, if you told me not to drink, I'd have drank more, just to piss
yeah,
you off, because you
yeah.
don't have the
You
right to
can't
tell
tell
me what to
people.
do.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
didn't do that. And what I did
Mm,
instead was, not realizing I was doing it, I just kept going, oh my God, I can't believe how bloody good I feel. Oh my God, like it's so
mm,
amazing waking up every day, having had 8 hours sleep, and I've got so much
mm,
energy. And I had my own business at the time, and my own recruitment business. And
mm,
that first 100 days, I made more money in that 100 days than I'd made in the whole year previously, because I was
mm,
so motivated, I was so energized, I had such
mm,
a clear head, I was feeling confident, like all of those things. So what I didn't realize was all of those little things that I was saying were rubbing off on him in terms of
Mm,
the messaging around the positivity of an alcohol-free life. And so
mm,
he just then got to the point where he was like, yeah, my drinking's, we were both heavy drinkers, right? So he was a big
mm,
drinker and just realized that it was just impacting him. He didn't have control over it anymore. He was
mm,
like me. Once he started, it was anyone's guess as to where or when the night would end because you just didn't
mm,
know. And my kids were, how old were they when I stopped? Scarlett was, I think they were 7 and 9 when I stopped. So
mm,
it was also just getting to that age of really wanting to reflect on, do I want my kids seeing me drinking all the time?
mm,
And is that the mum that I want to be? And how can I do this differently? And that was the other thing. I knew from those breaks that I'd taken that the way I parented was completely different because when you're hungover, hey, I might get them to their cricket games, but I'd be like hiding behind my sunnies with a cup of coffee and like moaning and bitching about it. And whereas
mm,
when you're sober and you're jumping out of bed at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I'd go for a run before 7 a.m. and then I'd take them to their netball and rugby and what have you. And it just created such a different vibe in our house. And the
mm,
weekends would just stretch on forever. And I
mm,
enjoyed my kids. And that's the difference.
mm,
We all know what parenting with a hangover is like. It's shit
mm,
and it's not pleasant. Whereas parenting without a hangover meant that I just loved hanging out with them and I just really
mm.
loved being with them. And that was just a game changer for me as well. And that's another, big reason for my sobriety is the mum that I get to be and the role modeling that I get to do.
Mm. Yeah, and it's so countercultural because with the whole mummy wine culture, it seems
No,
like it's a given that you have to drink, and that's the only way you can parent, as opposed to what you've just
totally,
described, which is completely different. You're so much more present. You enjoy it more. I think that's the point you were making, isn't it? It is
totally.
it is different, but what we're told and what all the cards, birthday cards, Mother's Day cards, all of those things say is it has to be around alcohol. You get those invites to restaurants because it's Mother's Day, you get a glass of champagne, or it's your birthday, you get a glass of fizz or whatever
Yeah.
it is. And that's just the norm. And so I, I think it's important to just highlight that there is a different way and it can be better.
I would say 100 times, 100% it's better because parenting when you're drunk and parenting when you're hungover are both bloody awful. And parenting alcohol free, it's a completely different way of doing it. And I'm so
Mm.
grateful. I'm so grateful that I stopped when I did because I
Yeah.
can't tell you the number of women that I've coached who have stopped when their kids have been in their 20s. And one of the biggest regrets that my clients have who stop drinking when their kids are older is that they didn't do it sooner. And there's a lot of regret, there's a lot of shame, I think, that comes up for all of us when we stop drinking and we realize what a better person, what a better mum, what a better wife we are without alcohol. And then we can start to feel a lot of shame for the things we did and said and how we behaved when we were drinking. But I always say, when we know better, we do better. And
Mm.
there wasn't the alcohol-free movement then that there is now. No one 10 years ago was talking about sobriety and alcohol in the way that they are now. The only story about alcohol back then was that it was positive and it was great and it added to your life in some way. And so we have to go so kindly and gently with ourselves when we deal with these emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true. I think we can be really harsh on ourselves and we can regret it and think, oh no, I should have done it sooner and everything else. But you do it when the time's right and it's the right
Yeah.
time for you and everything, you're always in the right time. So I agree, it's being kind to yourself. Okay, so let's go on to your book. I want to make sure we cover your brilliant book, Beyond Booze. So why don't you give us an overview of the book and what inspired you to write the book as well? I'd love to hear the story behind it.
Yeah. So after I quit drinking in 2019, I then felt a really strong desire to have a change in career. So I waited a year because they always say don't make any big decisions in the first year of sobriety. So I'd done all the work on myself. I'd run my first, like, well, not wasn't my first half marathon, but it was my best half marathon. And then in March 2020, obviously COVID hit, and that played a big part in my decision as well, because my recruitment business pretty much shut down because no one was hiring. And so I then decided to use that time to retrain. So I did my health and wellbeing qualification as a health and wellbeing coach. And then I went on to train as a grey area drinking coach. And then in January 2021, I set up my business. And it was to support women like me who were in that mummy wine culture stage of life to change their relationship with alcohol. And I did one interview with Mamma Mia, which is a big online female news website over here in Australia. And 8,000 women contacted me within
Wow.
24 hours. And every single one of them said, "You've just told my story."
Mm.
And that was when I knew how many women were stuck in this grey area where they've realized as they've got older, mostly in their 40s and 50s, that alcohol's making them feel shit. It's impacting their sleep, it's impacting their hormones, it's impacting their weight, it's impacting their self-talk, their confidence, their anxiety. So they're starting to question alcohol. But while they're not physically addicted, many are emotionally addicted. And so they're using it for something, and it's not as easy as going, just cut down, just stop drinking. So my business has just grown from that moment onwards. And I've now supported thousands and thousands of women all over the world through my alcohol-free programs. And then I have a group coaching program called Rediscovering Me, which is all about who am I in sobriety? So I've removed the alcohol, but how do I actually go on to create a life I love without alcohol? And that then led to me writing the book, because what I knew to be true was that there's lots of books out there in the sober world. There's two types, right? There's the memoirs, and there's some incredible memoirs and stories of people who've removed alcohol. And there's lots of how-to books, how to quit alcohol in 30 days, how to take a break from booze. But what I realized was missing, there was no books on how do you create a life you love so you don't need alcohol. What, not how to get sober, but how to stay sober. So
Yeah.
there's all these 30-day breaks and all these 30-day programs, but there was nothing in the quit lit world that I could see that was really focusing on long-term sobriety and emotional sobriety and doing the work to create a life you love. So that was where my thoughts around creating this book came from. So Beyond Booze, How to Create a Life You Love Alcohol Free. So it launched in February of this year, and I'm just getting the most incredible feedback. So many women, I get messages every single week just saying it's the best book I've read in the sober world. I felt like you were telling my story. I felt like you wrote this book just for me. And it's got really good mix of stories and storytelling, but also with so many tools and strategies to actually create change. So there's reflection points, there's journaling prompts, there's boxes to fill out of ideas of what you could add in when you take alcohol out. So it's a real practical book, as well as lots of inspiring stories, not just mine, but also women from my sober community.
Oh, brilliant. It's great that you've included women from your sober community as well. So it's a real mix then. Fantastic. And so you were inspired to write the book because obviously you stopped drinking, you saw that it was making a difference in your life, and you thought that there wasn't enough really of books that were telling you about the thriving part of alcohol free, which is obviously what I focus on as well. And I think it's really important to highlight that you can live alcohol free, because I think a lot of people get to the point where they stop drinking for whatever reason, but are not actually enjoying their life or feel like they're depriving themselves. And so it's really important that your book's there. So what are the top 3 tips to at least start enjoying life alcohol free, instead of thinking it's a negative thing?
Yeah. So there's a chapter in there called What's Your Fun Plan? And it's all about how do I have fun without alcohol? Because it goes back to those old beliefs that we create at 5 years old when we watch our parents
Yeah.
having dinner parties getting pissed, where our thoughts are the way to have fun as an adult is to have a dinner party and get drunk. And so
Yeah.
we've carried that belief for a really long time. And so I really
Mm.
challenge that in the book. And I get the reader to think about, well, what is fun? Fun is anything we do for our own enjoyment and pleasure. So
Mm.
it's actually about creating a life that is full of actions and activities and experiences that you intentionally go about creating for your own enjoyment and pleasure. And the thing about
Mm.
alcohol is it's really easy to drink while you're unloading the dishwasher, making dinner, getting the kids' dinner ready, peeling the potatoes. We do a wine in hand while we're doing all those things. And what I'm
Yeah.
asking the reader to do is actually pause for a moment and go, if we want to create change, we might have to make changes in our life. We might need to delegate more. We might need to set time aside, but also to remember that fun is not only something we do at 8 o'clock at night in a bar in our best dress. For me, fun sometimes is being in my PJs on the sofa at 6 o'clock on a Friday night with my daughter watching a movie. It
Yeah.
might be getting up at 6 a.m. to go for a sunrise hike with my best mate and climb and see the sunrise. I love doing sauna ice baths, and it's all of the things that we do for our own pleasure and our own enjoyment. It doesn't just
Yeah.
have to be going out and getting drunk, and it's changing our mindset around that. So that would be one. The second thing would be I don't know a single woman who does not experience stress in her life. Stress is there, stress is part of the modern world. And I've got an entire chapter on how do you manage your stress without alcohol. And I talk about the supplements that I've used that have really helped me. I talk about the somatic practices that have really helped me in terms of breath work, in terms of yoga, in terms of sound healing, and just
Mm.
being really intentional with
Mm.
creating strategies and tools that really help us. Because I always
Mm.
say the goal is not to have no stress, because that's not
Mm.
realistic. The goal
Yeah.
is to manage your stress well and to have a robust toolkit of what's going to help you. So I think managing the stress, negotiating, what your fun plan is, and in that creating boundaries around your own time and energy so that you've got time and energy to devote to your life.
Mm.
And then the third thing would be get really strong connections in your life of people that are
Mm.
supporting you and are also on a growth journey. Because what I
Mm.
find to be true is that most people, when they're drinking and they're grey area drinkers, their life stays very stagnant and very stuck because it's really hard to reach your full potential in life when you're drinking all the time. And when you surround yourselves with other people that are growing and changing and evolving, and they want to do that, and they're okay with discomfort and doing hard things and talking about it, it pushes us to be like that. So surround yourself with people like that.
Yeah, I love that. I love those three tips, and I think they're really poignant. And for me, being alcohol free is all about personal growth and transformation. That's fundamentally what it is, and we are always growing. And I'd love to get your perspective, but for me, nearly 4 years in, that's seeing changes each time. But there are some days where you think, well, nothing's really changed recently, but we are still making those little tiny changes every day, and we are still growing every day. And if I look back 4 years, the amount of things that have happened, I'm like, wow, this it wouldn't have happened in 10 and 15 years if I hadn't have taken out alcohol and ditched drinking. Because as you say, people just get a bit stuck and a bit sort of same old, same old. They don't feel the need to grow and change because that's uncomfortable, and it's not what society tells you to do either. So I think that they're really great points, really great points. Okay, is there anything else before I ask you the question that I ask everyone? Anything else you want to mention?
Look, I think if any of your listeners are listening and you're interested in my book, then go and grab a copy, Beyond Booze. You can get it on Amazon all over the world. If you're in the UK, I believe it's in Waterstones. It's on Kindle. I'm just in the process of recording the audio book, so that will be available later this year. If you're in Australia listening to this, the book's in Dimmocks, in Big W, Target, Kmart, and on Amazon's. And it's on Amazon in the USA and Canada as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. It's a book for women, from a woman, and I've put my heart and soul into it, and I know how much it's helping women all over the world. And if any of your listeners want to reach out to me, if they've got any questions, come and follow me on Instagram. It's just at Sarah Rusbatch, or send me an email, hello@sarahrusbatch.com. And you can see on my website all of my programs that have just been absolutely life-changing for thousands of women all over the world to support them to find freedom and create a life they love, alcohol-free.
Brilliant. Thank you. And so at the end of every podcast, I ask everyone the same question. What does thriving alcohol-free mean to you? And you've said so much that I can imagine what your answer would be, but simply, what does thriving alcohol-free mean to you, Sarah?
It means knowing yourself and
Mm,
being able to connect with yourself to create a life that is so aligned with who you are at your authentic self that you're simply thriving.
love that answer. I was saying to you earlier, I just love all the answers I get on this. I think they're wonderful. And creating a life where you're fully aligned to your authentic self is the best possible outcome, isn't it? It just
Yeah.
means you can be and you can do and you can have everything that you want in your own authentic way. And you don't have to do what everyone else says you need to do. Do
And
things
you just can't
differently.
do it when you're drinking. You cannot
Yeah.
align yourself to your authentic self because most people don't even know who their authentic self is. I
Yeah.
didn't. And that's what
Mm,
thriving alcohol free has allowed me to do is to discover who I really am at my core. And I
mm,
just think it's so sad that most people will get to the end of their lives and never
mm.
actually know who they really are.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, thank you, Sarah. And I'm so excited for you and your book. Everyone should go and get a copy, Beyond Booze. And I look forward to hearing what happens next. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I do hope you enjoyed the episode with Sarah. I love chatting to her, and I loved what she said about fun being anything we do for our own enjoyment and pleasure, because actually that's the basics of it. And we talk about what does fun mean to you? What does thriving mean to you? And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can simply be anything that you enjoy or that brings you pleasure. So I hope that was helpful and maybe has reframed something for you. And as I said, if you're doing the alcohol-free August challenge, then keep going. You're doing incredibly well. You've done 14 days, and so you're nearly halfway, which is amazing. And I'm so proud of you and rooting for you. So let me know if you have any questions and listen out for some exciting news coming over the next couple of weeks. And I do hope you'll be part of some of the things that I'm organizing. I hope you have the most fabulous week, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.